Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. It all started one late afternoon, the kind that carries the smell of rain before it even begins. I was sitting on my porch, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, when I saw him, my neighbor, David, standing by his fence, staring at the sky as if he were waiting for something. David wasn't the kind of man you noticed right away. He was quiet, polite, always helping with mail or shoveling snow in the winter, but there was a distance in him, a kind of stillness that made you think he was carrying something heavy. I'd lived next to him for almost 8 years, and in all that time, we'd only exchanged short pleasantries. Good morning, nice weather, or your roses are looking lovely this year. But that day felt different. Maybe it was the heaviness in the air, or maybe it was the look in his eyes. Something about it told me he needed to talk. Everything okay, David? I asked, stepping down from the porch. He hesitated before answering. Yeah, I guess. Just one of those days, you know? I nodded. I did know. Since my husband passed away 3 years ago, I'd learned what those days felt like, the kind where you're surrounded by people but still feel like you're standing alone in the middle of an empty field. The rain began soon after, slow at first, then steady, soaking the wooden fence between us. I was about to head back inside when David called out, "Hey, would you mind coming over for a second? I could use a hand with something." I hesitated. I wasn't used to being invited anywhere anymore. But something in his voice, quiet, uncertain, made me say yes. Inside his house, I was struck by how neat everything was. Not spotless, but cared for. The faint smell of cedar filled the air. He pointed toward a framed picture on the wall, a photograph of a young woman holding a baby. "My wife and son," he said softly. "They were in that car accident about 6 years ago." The room went quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence is the only kind of respect that makes sense. He turned to me and smiled faintly. "You remind me of her. Not in how you look, just the way you carry yourself." She had that same calmness, even when everything around her was falling apart. I felt a lump form in my throat. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. It wasn't a compliment, it was something deeper, like a piece of shared understanding between two people who'd both lost something they couldn't replace. Over the next few weeks, we started talking more. Sometimes I'd find him fixing something in his garage, and I'd bring over some iced tea. Other times, he'd stop by my porch with a jar of homemade jam. Small things, simple gestures, but they began to fill the long, empty spaces in my days. One evening, he knocked on my door. "Do you have a minute?" he asked, holding a small wooden box. I nodded, curious. We sat on the porch again, the sky turning that deep orange color that only lasts a few moments before dusk. He opened the box carefully. Inside was a small bird carved from wood, smooth, delicate, with tiny wings stretched wide as if frozen in flight. "I used to carve things for my son," he said quietly. It helped me feel closer to him. But after they were gone, I stopped. Until a few days ago. He handed the bird to me. "I made this for you. It's not perfect, but..." I couldn't speak. My hands trembled slightly as I held it. The little bird felt warm, as though it carried something alive inside it. "Why me?" I finally asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Because you still look at the world like it can be mended." I'd forgotten people like that existed. The air felt thick around us, full of words neither of us dared to say. It wasn't romance, it was something softer, quieter. Two broken people finding comfort in the presence of someone who understood. From that day on, our friendship grew into something the neighborhood couldn't quite define. People whispered, of course. They wondered what was going on between the widow and the quiet man next door. I heard them sometimes at the market or during morning walks. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not pitied, not judged, just seen. Then, one evening, something happened that no one expected. It was late, almost midnight, when I heard a knock at the door. The kind that carries urgency but not fear. I opened it to find David standing there, drenched, his eyes wide and unfocused. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. His voice was trembling. "I just came from the hospital. My sister passed away an hour ago. She was the last family I had. I stepped aside, and without a word, he walked in. We didn't talk much that night. He sat on the couch, staring at his hands, while I made tea neither of us drank. Eventually, he broke down, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, heartbreaking way. And I sat beside him, not to fix anything, not to say the right words, but simply to be there. That night changed everything. From then on, our connection wasn't just about shared grief, it was about survival, about learning to keep going when you've already lost so much. And though I'm still ashamed to admit it, a part of me began to look forward to seeing him every day. It felt wrong somehow, like I was betraying the memory of my husband. But David never asked for more than I could give. He simply showed up, again and again, until the loneliness didn't feel so heavy anymore. What he did next, what none of us expected, would change not just my life, but the way our entire street saw him. After that night, something shifted between David and me. It wasn't something you could name, or even explain, it was just there, hanging in the air like the smell of rain after a storm. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. But from then on, he started coming by every morning, knocking softly on my door with a smile that always looked a little unsure. Sometimes he'd bring fresh bread from the bakery on Maple Street. Other days, he'd bring nothing at all, just himself, standing there, waiting to share a quiet cup of coffee on the porch. It became our routine. Two people who had spent years learning how to live alone, slowly remembering what it felt like not to be. The neighborhood noticed, of course. Mrs. Green from across the street was the first to comment. "You two have been spending an awful lot of time together," she said one morning, pretending to trim her roses while watching us over the fence. "It's nice to see you smiling again, dear." I smiled back, but I could feel the heat in my cheeks. I wasn't used to being the subject of gossip anymore. It made me feel exposed, like I was breaking some silent rule about how widows are supposed to live. But then David would laugh, say something kind or ridiculous, and the noise in my head would fade. One afternoon, I walked over to his house carrying a basket of apples from my backyard tree. When I stepped inside, I noticed a room I hadn't seen before. It was small and filled with unfinished wooden carvings, figures, animals, even tiny houses. There was sawdust on the floor and sunlight pouring through a narrow window, catching the dust in the air. "I didn't know you still worked on these," I said. He smiled faintly, running a hand over one of the carvings. "I hadn't. Not until recently. Guess you inspired me." His words lingered in the air between us. I didn't know what to say, so I reached out and picked up one of the figures, a small wooden heart, smooth but imperfect, with a crack running right through the middle. "It broke while I was working on it," he said. But I decided not to throw it away. "I like the way the crack looks, it makes it more real." That line stayed with me for days. Maybe because that's how I felt too, cracked, imperfect, but somehow still here. Over the next few weeks, we grew closer in the quietest of ways. We didn't talk about the past anymore. Instead, we talked about small things, the sound of the wind, the smell of freshly cut grass, or the memories of summers that felt longer than they really were. Every word felt like a thread, slowly stitching together two torn lives. One Saturday morning, he invited me to go for a drive. It was early autumn, and the leaves were beginning to turn. I hesitated at first, but something in his voice made it hard to say no. We drove through winding backroads, the kind that make you forget about everything else. The radio played softly, an old country song that neither of us knew the words to. After a while, he stopped by the edge of a small lake I'd never noticed before. The water was still, reflecting the trees like a perfect mirror. We sat there for a long time without saying much. Then, quietly, he said, "I come here every year on this day. It's my son's birthday." I turned to look at him. His face was calm, but his hands were shaking slightly. "I used to bring flowers, or toys," he continued. "But now I just sit. I tell him about the year that's passed. About how I'm still trying." My throat tightened. I wanted to comfort him, but words felt too small. Instead, I just sat beside him, letting the silence do the work. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet. "I know people talk," he said softly, "about us. About what they think is happening. But I don't care what they say. You've brought something back into my life that I thought was gone forever, peace." It was then that I realized what he'd done for me too. He'd brought color back into my gray world. And even though I didn't know where our connection would lead, I knew it was something good. Something real, but not everyone saw it that way. A few days later, I found a letter slipped under my door. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from one of the church ladies. The note said, "It's not right, what you're doing. People are starting to talk. You should think about your reputation." For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I crumpled it up and threw it away. That evening, I told David about it. He listened quietly, then said, "They don't know what we've been through. Let them talk." He was right, but it still hurt. All I wanted was a little peace, and somehow, even that had to come with judgment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the light from David's porch flicker through the rain. He was out there, too, I could tell, just sitting, the way he always did when his thoughts got too heavy. Something in me broke then, not in a bad way, but in the way you realize that hiding your heart doesn't protect it, it just makes it lonely. I put on my coat and walked outside. The rain soaked my hair, my clothes, my shoes, but I didn't care. When I reached his porch, he looked up, startled. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I just didn't want you to be alone tonight." He didn't say anything. He just moved over a little, making room for me on the step. We sat there together, listening to the rain and the quiet hum of the world around us. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. But it was real. That night, something unspoken settled between us, an understanding that what we shared didn't need to be explained or defended. It simply was, and yet, I didn't know then that the next few days would bring a test that neither of us could have seen coming, something that would shake the fragile peace we'd built and make the entire town see David in a completely different light. The day everything changed began quietly, almost peacefully. The kind of morning where the sunlight filters through the curtains just right, soft and golden, making you believe, even for a moment, that the world is kind again. I had baked an apple pie earlier that day, something I hadn't done since my husband was alive. It felt good to do something simple, something that smelled like home. David came by around noon, carrying a small wooden box again. I smiled when I saw it. "Another bird?" I asked, teasing him. He shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "Not this time. This one's different." We sat at the kitchen table, and he opened the box carefully. Inside was a small cross carved from dark walnut wood. It was rough around the edges, not polished like his usual work. "I made this for your husband," he said quietly. "You've spoken about him with so much love. I thought he should have something from me." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The gesture was so unexpected, so full of quiet respect, that my eyes filled before I could stop them. "David, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," he replied softly. I wanted you to know that I understand what it's like to still talk to someone who's not here anymore." That was the kind of man David was, gentle, thoughtful, never asking for more than he gave. And that was what made what happened next so hard to believe. Later that evening, as I was cleaning the dishes, I heard raised voices outside. At first, I thought it was kids playing in the street, but then I recognized the sound. It was David's voice. And it wasn't calm. I stepped out onto the porch. Down by his gate stood two men from the neighborhood, both of whom I'd known for years. They were shouting at him, accusing him of things I couldn't make out clearly at first. "I only caught fragments. You think you can fool everyone? We saw the police at your place last week." My heart started to race. "Police?" David tried to speak, but they wouldn't let him. One of them shoved him hard, and I ran down the steps before I even knew what I was doing. "Hey, stop it," I shouted. "What's going on?" The taller man turned to me. "You don't know, do you?" he said bitterly. "Your perfect neighbor has been under investigation. 4 months. I froze. "Investigation? For what?" "For theft," he spat. "He worked for that construction company downtown. They said money went missing, thousands. He was the one handling the accounts." I turned to look at David, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. His hands were shaking slightly, and his jaw was clenched. "It's not what they think," he said finally. "I didn't take anything. I was trying to pay off my sister's medical bills. The money was gone before I could fix it." The men muttered something under their breath and walked away, leaving the air heavy and bitter. When they were gone, I stood there in the fading light, my heart pounding in my chest. David, I whispered, is it true? He looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't before, shame, yes, but also exhaustion. It's complicated, he said. But I swear, I wasn't trying to steal. I just didn't know what else to do. He told me everything that night. About how his sister's treatment had drained everything he had. How the company's accounting system had been easy to manipulate. How he'd planned to replace the money once she recovered, but she hadn't. And when she died, he'd stopped caring whether anyone found out. I'm not proud of it, he said quietly. I know it was wrong. But I didn't do it for greed. I did it out of desperation. I sat there, listening, feeling torn in ways I didn't know I could be. I believed him, and yet, part of me was afraid. Not of him, but of what this would mean for him, for us, for everything we'd built in those fragile months of healing. The next morning, the gossip spread like wildfire. By noon, everyone in the neighborhood knew. I couldn't even walk to the mailbox without hearing whispers. Mrs. Green didn't even try to hide her words this time. You should be careful who you let into your house, she said sharply. Some people bring trouble with them. That night, I sat by the window again, the wooden bird still resting on the sill. Its wings looked ready to take flight, but it would never move. I wondered if that was what we were, something beautiful but grounded by our own pasts. Then I saw him outside, packing boxes into his old truck. My chest tightened. I went out, the cold night air stinging my skin. You're leaving? I asked. He nodded, not looking up. I can't stay here anymore. Not after this. People don't forget things like that. Where will you go? He shrugged. Doesn't matter. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows me. I felt panic rising inside me, sudden and unfamiliar. David, you don't have to run. You can make this right. You can start again. He smiled sadly. You still think the world works that way, don't you? That people forgive. But they don't. Not really. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, and for a moment, I saw the man who had once stood at my fence, quiet and hopeful. Thank you, he said softly, for seeing the good in me when no one else did. And then he drove away, disappearing into the night, leaving only the sound of the engine fading down the road. I stood there long after he was gone, the cold creeping into my bones. I didn't know if I'd ever see him again. But deep down, I knew that somehow, this wasn't the end of his story, or mine. The days after David left were strange, empty, heavy, and quiet in a way that made me notice every sound. The wind rattling the windows, the neighbor's dog barking down the street, the faint hum of a car engine in the distance, all of it felt louder, more present. I tried to keep busy, baking, walking, tending to my garden, but nothing filled the space he left behind. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in careful, familiar handwriting. I tore it open with trembling hands and found a short note inside. I know I disappeared. I needed to find a place where I could make sense of things. But I haven't forgotten. I hope you can forgive me. Meet me where it all began, by the lake. 1 week from today. Please. I stared at it for a long time. My heart raced, a mix of hope and fear. Part of me wanted to throw it away and pretend it never existed. Another part of me, an aching, stubborn part, wanted to go. The week passed slowly. I found myself thinking about him constantly, about the wooden carvings, the quiet conversations, the way he made the world feel less lonely. And finally, when the appointed day arrived, I drove to the lake, the place where we had first sat together in silence months ago. The water was calm, reflecting the golden leaves of the surrounding trees. I stood at the edge, unsure whether to call out, to wait, or to turn back. Then I saw him, David, standing a few feet away, looking smaller somehow, but the same quiet, steady presence I remembered. Hello, he said softly when he noticed me. I walked toward him, my heart pounding. You came. I promised, he said. His eyes flicked to the water, then back to mine. I needed to make sure this time, I could face it. Face them. Face myself. He told me about the steps he had taken in the past weeks, how he had gone to the authorities, confessed everything, and worked to make amends for the mistakes that had forced him to leave. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic revelations, just the steady, quiet work of trying to be better. I listened, feeling a mix of admiration and relief. The man I had come to know, the one who had brought warmth and understanding into my life, was still here, but more honest, more open than ever. We walked along the edge of the lake, the leaves crunching underfoot. We didn't talk about the neighbors or the gossip that had chased him away. Instead, we talked about the small things, the smell of the water, the way the light fell through the trees, memories of simpler times. At one point, he stopped and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled out a small wooden bird, the same one he had made months ago. "I never gave this to you," he said, offering it to me. "I thought it should stay with you now. It belongs here, like everything we've shared." I took it in my hands, feeling its smooth surface and the careful craftsmanship. "Thank you," I whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. "I was scared," he admitted. "Scared that you'd see me as someone irredeemable. That all of this, everything we've shared, would be erased because of my mistakes." I reached for his hand. It was warm, steady, grounding. "David, we all make mistakes. But what matters is what we do after. And you've done the work. You've shown me that even when life is hard, we can still choose to be kind, to be honest, to be present." He squeezed my hand gently, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we had formed. No words were needed beyond that. We stayed by the lake until the sun began to set, the sky painted in shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years, a clarity that the world could be harsh, unforgiving even, but that human connection, compassion, and honesty could heal the deepest wounds. As we walked back to the car together, side by side, I realized that the story of David and me wasn't about scandal or shame. It wasn't about what the neighbors thought, or the mistakes of the past. It was about understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to face life with an open heart. Even now, thinking back, I'm ashamed to admit how much I worried about what others might think. But I'm also grateful for the quiet mornings, the shared silences, the carved birds, and the lake where two lives, broken in different ways, found each other again. And I know this for certain: some people walk into your life unexpectedly, and even when they shake everything you thought you knew, even when they make you confront your own fears and doubts, they can leave you stronger, gentler, and more alive than you ever imagined. David did that for me. And perhaps, in some small way, I did the same for him. The memory lingers, warm and vivid, like sunlight through the trees. And I carry it with me, always, a quiet reminder that life, in all its mess and unpredictability, can still offer moments of grace, and that sometimes, the people we least expect are the ones who help us find our way home.